The days after. The next several days alternated between mining and foraging in the garden, their outfits hanging in the wardrobe, washed and cleaned for each day. In both locations, they were joined by shadows working not far from them, swinging pickaxes and digging up vegetables. It was unnerving to see hundreds of these beings moving about, knowing what they were capable of doing to Mycorian's flesh. They continued following the rules, which remained the same as the first 2 days, except they no longer had to fix the garden. The flute remained in place, keeping insects from the roots. She became accustomed to the flying, even able to look up to enjoy viewing the 3 moons as Thal, Yulin, and Eris shone their separate sizes and colors in the bright sky. It was the morning Dicena's wardrobe was empty that things felt unnerving. There were no boots, earbuds, or overalls to wear, and it felt a bit awkward to go to the dining table in her sack dress, which she noticed had been washed and its cloth improved at some point during her stay. The others also wore their sack dresses and pants. They ate together, discussing the oddity of not having the mine or garden to go to, and remained seated when they finished breakfast. Then, the words and voice appeared. "Greetings. There are 19 Mycorians remaining, and you have all met the criteria of the factory. You each have enough in your accounts to live comfortable lives until the life stage to attend the ball, and enough wealth for 5 seasons after. Enjoy your lives." With that, the doors they had passed to come into this place opened. Words floated above them. "Please place your keys on the table and make sure to dip your heads in the pool 8 times before exiting." They looked at each other, stunned. "Make sure we continue to follow the rules," a female said, and everyone agreed, removing their keys. Rising, the group headed down the dark hallway to the glowing pool. Immediately, they noticed the pool lay just past the doors. After dipping, each person passed through halls with the warm, blowing air to dry. This was the opposite sequence from when they had entered the factory. At the hallway's end, daylight shone from the factory's open doors. Under the warmth of the day, they continued walking until they were halfway between the factory and the Great Mushroom, and stopped. Puzzlement was on each of their faces, as if they were waking from a dream. They looked at each other and their surroundings. "We won!" someone said. And slowly, it was the only thing they could agree upon. She remembered entering the factory, but everything after that she couldn't recall. Yet she had a sense of relief and a glowing realization of victory. "We did it!" a female near her exclaimed. Then, for some reason, hugged her. Dicena embraced the hug, uncertain why it didn't feel uncomfortable. She pulled back to see the smiling female, a few freckles dusting her nose. "We did it!" the female said again, offering no apologies for her sudden embrace. Instead, she hugged her again, and Dicena surprised herself by returning the second hug. A few Mycorians ran towards the scaffolding, driven by a sense to get as far away from the factory as they could. The female hugging Dicena released her and turned to watch them run. "Should they run?" she whispered, oddly. "It's okay," a male said, walking towards them. Both females looked at him. "And why can't they? We're okay out here now, and—" He paused before continuing. "My name's Jextine, and I live in the Leaf Lodging on the 17th floor. He stopped and stared at them. Dicena had no idea why he was telling them this, and she watched him struggle to continue. He blurted, "I would like to visit the both of you." The 2 females looked at each other, and Dicena was about to refuse this strange, off-kilter request when the female released her hand and said, "Yes, of course. My name's Umiko, and this is—" She pointed to Dicena, who stood a bit confused before answering. "Dicena?" "Dicena," Umiko repeated. And we're both happy to meet you, Jextine. That is, if we haven't already met before." They all knew she was referring to the factory, but none of them could bear to look back at it. He released a sigh of relief. Wanting to avoid an awkward silence, Deana said, "I live in the Leaf Lodging, on the 31st floor." He nodded and looked at Umiko, who uncomfortably admitted, "I'm at the undergrowth." It was the lowest state of facilities on the Great Mushroom. Immediately, Deana felt sorry for her. "But obviously not after today," she beamed. "I'll join you two at the Leaf Lodging." "Actually," the male said, scratching his thigh, though Deana figured he didn't itch, "I believe we should all move to the Fungi Lounge. I mean, the Leaf Lodging is incredible, but its prices just aren't worth it. The Fungi Lodge should meet us in the middle for our finances." He was speaking to them as if they were all in a relationship. Before Deana could object, Umiko said, "Okay, I agree." She began walking to the scaffolding, and Deana stared at her. Then looked at the male, who was smiling profusely. She didn't know what was happening. Later that day, heading out of her private quarters for the sponge room to relieve herself, she found Jextine standing in her hallway. He hadn't seen her yet, and she wondered if she should go back inside to avoid him. But then he turned, saw her, and smiled. "I was just going to the sponge room," Deana said, hoping he'd pick up on her tone of dismissal. Instead, he just smiled more. "I will wait," he said. She had no choice. After she finished relieving herself, she allowed him into her room. "My nub is desensitized," she blurted out. Part of her wished he would leave. But a tiny hope inside didn't. Jextine only nodded. "We'll take our time then." And shockingly, he did. Despite her protests that he didn't have to wait for her to split so wide open, and her discomfort with him having to rub her nub for so long, he patiently assured her that he was fine, and not to worry. His insistence slowly made her believe he was being quite honest. And soon, she was moaning and ready for him to enter. His hard flesh dove in, making her gasp as he spoke in her ear. "I'll always wait for you, because you're mine." To pretend she was his made her accept him more. His hand caressed her lower breast, and his thrust made her pour her eggs from the walls of her womb. He released in response, his groan increasing into a wail. His arms circled her in a tight embrace as he continued to move. He should have been done, but he wasn't, as she released another wave of eggs and moaned for him to seed them. He kept moving as his erection pulsated once more before it relaxed and withdrew. Even then, he ground his nub at her opening. Deana felt wetness on her shoulder, as she felt him shaking. Was he weeping? He was, she saw, as he lifted himself and wiped at his face. "Sorry," he apologized, embarrassed. "I was so hungry, and I haven't felt that way in—" He paused, then added, "in a long time. There's something about you and Umiko. I need you both." Deana's eyes widened as she saw his nub erupt again, and he fell on her, pushing himself inside. Thrusting, he demanded a promise. "Dance with me. You have to dance with me." How many times has she told herself not to fall into this situation? Not to state what wasn't possibly true? But she couldn't help herself. She told herself it was the extreme pleasure he gave her, that she was happy to find someone who could arouse her nub to a point where she filled her womb with riches again. It wasn't his smile. It wasn't his tenderness. It wasn't his open emotions about her or his earnest need for her to be at his side. She couldn't help it as her lips parted in a moan, exclaiming, "I promise." Please continue to The Ball.